You do not belong here." The words cut through the evening air like a blade, sharp and final. Alara kept her eyes down, her fingers still working to tie the bundle of feverfew and sage she had just harvested from the forest edge. She did not need to look up to know who spoke. Mira's voice had that particular edge of cruelty wrapped in sweetness that made it somehow worse than outright hostility. "The gathering is for wolves, Alara, not for broken things pretending to be one of us." The small crowd that had gathered near the village square murmured in agreement, a sound like distant thunder that promised a coming storm. Alara's hands trembled, just slightly, but she forced them to stillness. She had learned long ago that showing weakness only fed their contempt. 23 years of this. 23 years of being the anomaly, the shameful secret, whispered about behind closed doors and mocked openly in the streets. In a world where your wolf defined everything, where transformation was as natural as breathing, she was the girl who had never shifted, the girl who had no wolf, the abomination. "I am not going to the gathering," Alara said quietly, finally looking up. Her voice was steady, even if her heart was not. "I will stay here and tend to anyone who needs healing after the ceremony. You know there are always injuries when so many wolves gather in one place." Mira laughed, a sound like breaking glass. She was beautiful in the way that wolves often were. All sharp angles and predatory grace, with auburn hair that caught the fading sunlight and eyes that gleamed with casual malice. She had shifted for the first time at 13, early even by their standards, and had never let Alara forget the gulf between them. How convenient. The wolfless curandera will hide in her cottage with her herbs and potions while the rest of us answer our king's call. Tell me, do you even feel shame anymore, or have you grown numb to it? The question hung in the air, and Alara felt the weight of every eye upon her. She knew these people, had delivered medicines to them when they were sick, set bones when they were broken, sat vigil beside deathbeds when there was nothing left to do but ease the passing. And still, they looked at her like this. Like she was something less than human, because she was not quite wolf. "My grandmother served this village for 50 years as a healer," Alara said. And there was steel in her voice now, forged in the fires of a lifetime of rejection. "She taught me everything she knew before she died. I have saved lives here. Children who would have died from fever, women who would have bled out in childbirth, men who would have lost limbs to infection. I do not need to shift to have value." For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in Mira's expression. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the faintest shadow of shame. But then Marcus stepped forward, and whatever softness might have been there vanished, like morning mist. Marcus was Mira's mate, a warrior in the pack's guard, all brute strength and limited imagination. He was exactly the kind of wolf who measured worth in fangs and claws and nothing else. "Value?" he said, and his laugh was uglier than Mira's had been. "You are a liability, Alara. What happens when enemies attack and you cannot shift to defend yourself? What happens when the pack needs every wolf and you are standing there, useless and vulnerable? You are dead weight, and everyone here knows it." The crowd's murmur grew louder, more aggressive. Alara felt her chest tighten, that familiar constriction of breath that came when the walls closed in and there was nowhere to run. But she had been running her whole life, in 1,000 small ways. Running from their judgment, their scorn, their barely concealed disgust. She was tired of running. "Then it is fortunate that the Alpha King has not called for me to be a warrior," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "He called for all wolves to present themselves at the gathering. I am not a wolf. Therefore, I am not required to attend." It was logic, cold and simple, and it was also a lie. Because deep down, in a place she barely dared to acknowledge even to herself, Alara wondered. Wondered if there was something inside her that had simply never awakened. Wondered if the reason she felt so disconnected from her human body sometimes was because there was another form trying to claw its way out. And failing, trapped behind some invisible barrier she could not name or break. You are required because the Alpha King's decree included everyone of age within pact territories, Mira said, stepping closer now. There was something dangerous in her eyes, something that went beyond casual cruelty into genuine malice. And do you know what happens to those who defy the Alpha King's direct command? It is considered treason, punishable by exile at best, death at worst. Ilara's blood ran cold. She had not known that, had not realized that the summons was mandatory for everyone, regardless of whether they could shift. Her mind raced, calculating options, and finding none that did not end in disaster. If she went to the gathering, her inability to transform would be exposed before the entire kingdom, not just her small village. She would be humiliated on a scale she could barely imagine. But if she did not go, she would be branded a traitor and hunted down. There was no way out. There had never been a way out. "I will go," she said finally, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I will present myself as commanded." Mira smiled, and it was a smile of pure triumph. "Good. We leave at moonrise. Do try not to embarrass us all more than you already have." The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, as if disappointed that the confrontation had not escalated into something more violent. Ilara stood alone in the square as the sun dipped below the horizon, her bundle of herbs forgotten. At her feet, her whole body felt numb, disconnected, as if she were watching herself from a great distance. This was it. This was the moment she had spent her entire life dreading. Tomorrow, under the full moon, in front of the Alpha King himself and every wolf in the realm, she would be revealed for what she truly was. Nothing. No one. A broken thing in a world that had no place for broken things. She walked back to her cottage on the edge of the village, a small stone structure that had belonged to her grandmother, and her grandmother's grandmother before that. It was filled with the smell of drying herbs, that sharp green scent that had been the backdrop of her entire life. Bundles hung from the rafters, and shelves lined every wall, crammed with jars and bottles and containers of every size. This was her world. This was where she belonged. Not in some grand ceremony where wolves howled at the moon and celebrated the power that flowed through their veins. But the Alpha King had, called, and she had no choice but to answer. Ilara sat at her workbench, her hands moving automatically to sort through a basket of willow bark that needed to be stripped and dried. The repetitive motion was soothing, something to focus on while her mind spun in increasingly desperate circles. She had heard stories about the gathering of wolves her entire life. It happened once every decade, a massive convergence of all pack territories within the kingdom to renew their oaths of loyalty to the throne. It was said to be a spectacle beyond imagining. Thousands upon thousands of wolves transformed under the full moon, their combined howl shaking the very earth. And she would stand in the middle of it all, alone and human, and utterly, completely exposed. The thought made her want to vomit. She worked through the night, unable to sleep, unable to stop her hands from their endless sorting and measuring and grinding. By the time dawn broke, she had prepared enough fever medicine to last the high village a month, as if she could somehow make up for her inadequacy by being useful in the only way she knew how. As the sun climbed higher, she heard the sounds of the village preparing for departure. Excited voices, the stamp of feet, the rustle of packs being loaded. For everyone else, this was a celebration. A chance to be part of something greater than themselves, to feel the unity of the pack, to bask in the presence of their king. For Ilara, it was a death march. She dressed simply, in the plain brown dress she wore for traveling, and braided her dark hair back from her face. There was no point in trying to look like anything other than what she was. A healer, an outsider, a girl with no wolf. When she stepped outside, the sun was high and bright, almost mocking in its cheerfulness. The village square was chaos, dozens of people moving in seemingly random directions that nevertheless had purpose and pattern if you knew how to read it. Families clustered together. Warriors. Checked weapons and supplies. Children ran between the adults, their excitement palpable and infectious. No one looked at Alara as she joined the back of the group. No one acknowledged her presence at all. She was a ghost, already forgotten, already erased. The journey to the sacred grounds where the gathering would take place took most of the day. They traveled through dense forest that gradually gave way to rolling hills, and finally to a massive clearing that stretched as far as the eye could see. Even from a distance, Alara could see that wolves were already gathering, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, from every corner of the kingdom. The sight was overwhelming. Tents had been erected in organized sections, each marked with the banner of its pack. Fires burned despite the warmth of the day, and the smell of roasting meat filled the air. And everywhere, there were wolves. Not just in human form, but actually transformed, massive creatures that padded between the tents. With casual grace, their eyes gleaming with intelligence and power. Alara felt her throat close. She did not belong here. Every instinct she had screamed at her to turn around, to run back to her cottage and her herbs and her solitary existence. But Mira was watching her, and Marcus too, and she knew that any sign of hesitation would be reported, would be used against her. So she lifted her chin and walked forward into the heart of the gathering, even as her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. The Silverwood contingent found their assigned area, a cluster of tents near the eastern edge of the clearing. Alara was given a space barely large enough for a bedroll, tucked behind the main tents where she would be out of sight. The message was clear. Hide. Do not remind anyone of your existence. Do not shame us more than necessary. She did not argue. What would be the point? As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Alara felt the energy in the clearing shift. It was subtle at first, a tightening in the air, a sense of anticipation that made her skin prickle. Wolves began moving toward the center of the clearing, where a massive stone dais had been erected. She had heard about this, the ceremonial platform where the Alpha King would stand to receive the oaths of loyalty from his people. She had never imagined she would see it herself. The crowd thickened, pressing closer, and Alara found herself being pushed forward despite her attempts to stay on the periphery. Bodies jostled against her, warm and solid and utterly indifferent to her discomfort. She was surrounded by wolves, by people who could transform and run and hunt and fight, and she was just human, fragile, mortal, weak. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and deep purple. And then, silence fell. It happened all at once, as if someone had thrown a switch. Thousands of wolves, and not a single sound. The quiet was so profound that Alara could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the whisper of wind through grass, could hear the distant cry of a bird settling into its nest for the night. Then he appeared. The Alpha King, Thorn Blackwood. Alara had never seen him before. Few had. He ruled from the capital, and his visits to the outer territories were rare and usually focused on matters of war or politics. But she had heard the stories. Everyone had. They said he was the strongest alpha born in 3 generations. They said his wolf was massive, black as midnight with eyes like molten silver. They said he had united the fractured packs through a combination of ruthless strategy and undeniable power. They said he was as beautiful as he was dangerous. The stories, Alara realized with a jolt that went through her entire body, had not done him justice. Thorn Blackwood stood on the stone dais like he had been carved from the same granite, tall and broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire clearing despite the distance. His hair was dark, almost black, and long enough to brush his shoulders. Even from where she stood, Alara could see the sharp lines of his face, the strong jaw, the aristocratic nose, the eyes that swept across the gathered crowd with an intensity that made her feel as if he could see into her very soul. He wore simple clothing, dark leather pants, and a shirt that left his forearms bare, showing the intricate tattoos that marked him as royalty. But he needed no crown, no ceremonial robes. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, undeniable and absolute. When he spoke, his voice carried across the clearing without effort, deep and resonant and commanding. "My wolves," he said. And there was something in those two words that made Alara's chest ache. Belonging. Recognition. A claim of kinship that she would never be able to answer. From every corner of this realm to stand before me tonight, to renew the bonds that tie us together, to howl as one pack, one kingdom, one family. The crowd responded with a sound that was almost physical, a roar of approval that made the ground vibrate beneath Alara's feet. She flinched, overwhelmed by the sheer force of it, by the raw emotion that poured from thousands of throats at once. "When my grandfather established this ceremony a century ago," Thorn continued, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. "He did so because he understood a fundamental truth. We are stronger together than we could ever be apart. Our power lies not in individual strength, but in the bonds we forge with one another, in the loyalty we give freely, and the protection we offer without hesitation." He paused, and in that pause, Alara felt something shift. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a change in the air, in the energy that flowed through the clearing like an invisible current. Thorn's eyes had stopped moving. They had fixed on something, on someone, in the crowd. And then, impossibly, horribly, Alara realized he was looking at her. No, that could not be right. There were thousands of people here, thousands of wolves, all more worthy of the Alpha King's attention than she could ever be. She was imagining it. She had to be. But his gaze did not waver. Those silver eyes, so pale they almost seemed to glow in the fading light, were locked onto her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Around her, she felt other wolves beginning to notice, felt them following the line of the Alpha King's stare, tracing it back to her, felt their confusion, their curiosity, their growing hostility as they realized who he was looking at. The wolfless girl, the broken one, the shame of Silverwood. Mira's voice hissed from somewhere to her left, barely audible but dripping with venom. "What did you do? Why is he looking at you?" Alara could not answer, could not speak, could barely breathe. Because Thorn Blackwood had tilted his head slightly, just a fraction, and something in that small gesture sent electricity racing down her spine. Recognition. The same impossible recognition she had felt when she first saw him. As if they knew each other. As if they had always known each other. "Tonight," Thorn said, his voice cutting through the rising murmur of the crowd. "We will run together under the full moon. We will remember what it means to be wolf. To be wild. To be free." He raised one hand, and the crowd fell silent once more, waiting for his command. "When the moon rises, you will shift. You will let your wolves take form and sing their loyalty to the sky, and I will run among you, not as your king, but as your brother." The energy in the clearing reached a fever pitch. Alara could feel it building. That wild anticipation, that hunger for transformation that pulsed through every wolf present like a second heartbeat. Everyone except her. The moon began to rise, enormous and perfect, and impossibly bright. Its light spilled across the clearing like liquid silver, and the first wolves began to shift. It started slowly, one here, two there, bodies rippling and reforming as human shapes gave way to something far more primal. Then it spread, faster and faster, until the entire clearing was a sea of transformation. The sounds were overwhelming, bones cracking and reforming, flesh tearing and healing, low growls and higher whines and the rustle of fur emerging from skin. And above it all, Rising like a symphony, the howls began. 1 wolf, then 10, then 100, then thousands, all howling at the moon in a chorus that shook the very air and made Alara's teeth ache with the vibration of it. She stood frozen in the middle of it all, the only human form in a sea of wolves. They towered over her, these magnificent creatures, all fur and muscle and gleaming eyes. Some were gray, some brown, some red or golden or white. They were beautiful and terrible and utterly, completely other. And she was alone. More alone than she had ever been in her entire life. She could feel their eyes on her, could feel their judgment, their confusion, their contempt. The wolfless girl who dared to stand among them, the abomination, the mistake. Alara closed her eyes, wishing she could disappear, wishing she could sink into the earth and never be seen again. But then she felt it. A pain so sudden and so intense that it drove every thought from her mind. It started in her chest, right behind her sternum, a burning sensation like someone had placed a white-hot coal inside her ribcage. She gasped, her eyes flying open, her hands clutching at her chest as if she could physically pull the pain out of her body. Around her, wolves backed away, their ears flattening against their skulls, their lips pulling back from their teeth. They could sense something was wrong. Something was happening. The pain spread, racing down her arms and legs, setting every nerve ending on fire. Alara fell to her knees, a scream tearing from her throat. It felt like her body was being ripped apart from the inside, like every bone was breaking simultaneously, like her skin was being flayed from her flesh. This was not supposed to happen. She did not have a wolf. There was nothing inside her to transform. Unless there was. Unless there had always been, trapped and dormant, and waiting for this exact moment to break free. The world tilted. Sideways, or maybe she did. Alara could not tell anymore. Could not focus on anything except the agony that consumed her, that obliterated every thought except the primal need to make it stop. She heard screaming, and dimly realized it was her own voice, raw and broken and barely recognizable. Then something inside her shifted. Not her bones, not her flesh, but something deeper, something fundamental. It felt like a door being thrown open after being locked for decades. It felt like taking a breath after nearly drowning. It felt like coming home to a place she had never been, but had always belonged. Her wolf emerged, not gradually, not gently, but in a violent eruption of power that sent shockwaves rippling through the clearing. One moment she was Alara, human and broken and alone. The next, she was something else entirely, something wild and ancient and impossibly powerful. The pain vanished as if it had never been, replaced by a clarity so intense it was almost painful in a different way. Every sense was magnified 100-fold. She could smell the individual scents of every wolf in the clearing, could hear heartbeats like drums, could see in the moonlight as clearly as if it were noon. And she could feel the earth beneath her paws, solid and real. Feel the wind in her fur, cool and carrying 1,000 stories. Feel the moon above, pulling at something deep inside her like the tide pulls at the ocean. Alara looked down at herself and froze. Her fur was silver. Not gray, not white, but true silver. The color of moonlight made solid, the color of starlight woven into flesh. It gleamed in the darkness, seeming to generate its own light, and as she moved it rippled like water, like mercury, like something not quite real. She had never seen anything like it, had never even heard of a wolf with fur this color. Around her, the howling had stopped. Thousands of wolves stood in absolute silence, staring at her with expressions that ranged from shock to fear to something that might have been awe. She tried to take a step and stumbled, unused to moving on 4 legs instead of 2. Her body felt simultaneously foreign and absolutely right, as if she had been walking around in the wrong skin her entire life and only now discovered what she was meant to be. A sound cut through the silence. A low, warning growl that came from multiple directions at once. Alara's ears swiveled, trying to locate the source, and she realized with cold dread that several wolves had begun to circle her, their hackles raised, their teeth bared. She recognized some of them, even in wolf form. Marcus, his brown fur bristled with aggression. Mira, smaller but no less dangerous, her auburn coat dark in the moonlight. Others from her village, from neighboring territories, all of them looking at her not with recognition, but with hostility, with fear. An older wolf, gray shot through with white, stepped forward. Even without human speech, his intention was clear. She was a threat, an unknown, something that did not fit into the established order, and therefore needed to be eliminated. Alara backed up, her heart, her wolf's heart, pounding in her chest. She did not want to fight, did not know how to fight, had never needed to learn because she had never had a wolf to fight with. But she could feel something rising inside her, some instinct older than thought, older than civilization, the instinct to survive, to protect, to defend. The gray wolf lunged. Alara reacted without thinking, twisting to the side, her newfound speed and agility taking her by surprise as much as it did her attacker. The gray wolf snapped at empty air where she had been a fraction of a second before, and Alara found herself several feet away, her muscles coiled and ready, her lips pulled back from teeth that felt far too large and far too sharp. More wolves moved in, emboldened by the first attack. 5, 6, 7 of them, all approaching from different angles, cutting off any escape route. They were going to tear her apart. And maybe they were right to. Maybe whatever she was, whatever this silver wolf meant, was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. She had spent her entire life being told she was less than nothing. Maybe this was the universe correcting that mistake, ensuring she did not get a chance to become something more. What do you think will happen next? Leave your predictions in the comments below. The attack came from 3 sides simultaneously. Alara moved on pure instinct, her body flowing through motions she had never learned, guided by something primal that understood violence in a way her human mind never could. She spun, using her momentum to slam her shoulder into one attacker's chest, sending him flying backward. Her jaws snapped at another, not making contact, but forcing him to retreat. The third managed to rake claws down her side, and pain blossomed, sharp and hot, but somehow distant, as if it were happening to someone else. Blood. Her blood, dark against her silver fur. The sight of it seemed to drive the attacking wolves into a frenzy. More joined the circle, and Alara knew with absolute certainty that she was about to die. She had finally found her wolf, finally become what she was supposed to be, and she was going to be killed for it within minutes. There was a certain poetry to that, she thought distantly, a certain cruel justice. Then the world exploded with power. It was not a sound, not exactly, though Alara heard it in her bones. It was not a physical force, though it drove the attacking wolves backward as surely as if they had been struck. It was presence, pure and overwhelming, the kind of dominance that could not be challenged or denied or even questioned. Every wolf in the clearing, including Alara, dropped flat to the ground, their bodies responding to an authority that transcended conscious thought. The Alpha King had descended from his dais. In wolf form, Thorn Blackwood was even more magnificent than he had been as a man. He was massive, easily twice the size of the largest wolf Alara had ever seen, his fur so black it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And his eyes, those silver eyes, glowed with an intensity that made her earlier perception seem like a pale imitation. He walked through the sea of prostrate wolves as if they did not exist, his gaze fixed solely on Alara. She could not move, could not breathe, could do nothing but watch as he approached, every step deliberate and measured, every movement radiating power and purpose. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the dark spice scent that seemed to cling to him. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his head tilted slightly as he studied her silver fur, her shaking form, the blood that still dripped from the wound on her side. Then, slowly, deliberately, Thorn Blackwood turned to face the crowd. And he stood. Beside her. Not in front of her, blocking her from view. Not behind her, pushing her forward to face judgment alone. Beside her. An equal. A partner. A statement that could not be misunderstood. The message was clear, written in body language that every wolf could read instinctively. She is under my protection. Challenge her and you challenge me. Touch her and you die. The silence that followed was absolute. No wolf moved. No wolf dared even to breathe too loudly. The Alpha King had made his decree without speaking a single word, and it was more binding than any oath, any law, any tradition. Alara's legs trembled, threatening to collapse beneath her. She did not understand what was happening, did not understand why the Alpha King would protect her, a nobody from a backwater village who had only just discovered she even had a wolf. But the warmth of his presence beside her, the solid reality of him standing between her and the violence that had been about to tear her apart, was undeniable. Slowly, Thorn shifted back to human form. The transformation was seamless, effortless, his massive wolf melting away to reveal the man beneath. He stood naked as all shifters did after transformation, utterly unself-conscious, his body a map of scars and muscle and contained power. "Does anyone else," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent clearing, "wish to challenge this wolf?" No one moved. No one spoke. "I asked a question," Thorn said, and there was something dangerous in his tone now, something that promised violence if he did not receive an answer. "Does anyone here believe they have the right to attack one of my wolves without provocation?" "Your Majesty," an older voice called out. Ilara recognized it even before she saw the wolf shift back to human. Elder Marcus, not to be confused with her village's younger Marcus, was the head of the Council of Elders, the advisory body that supposedly guided the Alpha King's decisions. He was ancient, his face lined with age, his body thin and frail-looking, but his eyes were sharp, calculating, missing nothing. "Your Majesty, with all respect, that wolf is moonborn." The word fell into the clearing like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock and fear and recognition through the assembled masses. Moonborn. Alara did not know what it meant, but she could feel the weight of it, the history and implication and dread that clung to the syllables. "I know what she is," Thorn said, and there was something in his voice that made Alara's still wolf senses prickle with attention. He had known. Before tonight, before her transformation, he had somehow known what she would become. "The Moonborn line was extinguished 300 years ago," Elder Marcus continued, stepping forward carefully, his hands spread in a gesture of submission, but his voice steady. "They were too powerful, too dangerous. They threatened the stability of the realm. Your own ancestor, King Aldrich, led the campaign to eliminate them." "King Aldrich," Thorn said, and his tone was cold enough to frost the grass, "made a great many mistakes. The genocide of the Moonborn was perhaps his greatest. He feared their power, feared that they might challenge his rule, and so he murdered an entire bloodline. Men, women, children. He hunted them down and killed them all." He paused, his silver eyes sweeping across the crowd. Or so everyone believed. The implication hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. If Alara was Moonborn, if the bloodline had not been completely extinguished, then King Aldrich had failed, and someone, somewhere, had managed to hide survivors for 3 centuries. "Your Majesty," another voice called out, younger this time. Alara recognized him too. Lord Gareth, the Alpha of the Northern Territories, ambitious and ruthless, and always maneuvering for more power. "Surely you cannot mean to allow a Moonborn to live. The prophecies are clear. Their return heralds destruction and change. They are a threat to everything we have built." "The prophecies," Thorn said. And now there was something that might have been amusement in his voice, dark and bitter. Were written by the victors of that ancient war. By the very people who committed genocide and needed to justify their actions. Of course they painted the Moonborn as harbingers of doom. It made their slaughter easier to stomach. He turned, his gaze finding Alara where she still crouched in wolf form, too overwhelmed to even attempt shifting back to human. This wolf has lived among you her entire life, has healed your sick, has eased your dying, has asked for nothing and received less. And the moment she discovers what she truly is, you turn on her like rabid dogs. The accusation in his words was damning, and Alara saw shame flicker across some faces in the crowd. Not many, not enough, but some. She will remain under my personal protection, Thorn continued, and anyone who harms her will answer to me. Directly. Is that understood? The crowd murmured assent, a sound like distant waves, reluctant but unable to refuse. Thorn's power was absolute. His word was law. Even those who disagreed could not openly defy him. Not here. Not now. Thorn looked down at her, and Alara felt the full force of his attention like a physical thing. Can you shift back? He asked, his voice gentler now, meant only for her. Alara did not know. She had only just learned to shift forward, and that had been an accident. A response to unbearable pain and circumstance. The idea of reversing the process seemed impossible. But she had to try. Could not remain in wolf form forever, cowering at the Alpha King's feet while thousands watched. She reached inside herself, searching for that door that had opened, trying to understand how to close it again or pass through it in the other direction. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then she felt the shift beginning, a sensation less painful than before, but still deeply uncomfortable, her body remembering its original shape and flowing back into that familiar form. When it was done, she knelt naked on the grass, her dark hair falling around her shoulders, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and shock, and a fear so profound it made her nauseous. Someone, she did not see who, threw a cloak over her shoulders. Thorn's scent clung to it, that dark spice smell, and she pulled it around herself gratefully, using it as much for psychological protection as physical modesty. Stand, Thorn said quietly. It was not a command. Not quite. But Alara found herself obeying anyway, her legs unsteady but holding her weight. She stood before the Alpha King, wrapped in his cloak, marked with blood and transformation, and a heritage she did not understand. What is your name? He asked. Alara, she managed, her voice hoarse from screaming. Alara Nightshade. Alara Nightshade, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. His eyes held hers, and she could not look away, could not break the connection that thrummed between them like a living thing. You will come with me to the capital. You will be given rooms in the palace, protection, and time to learn about your heritage. This is not a request. She should have been frightened, should have protested or asked questions or done anything other than simply nod her acceptance. But something in her, something newly awakened and ancient and absolutely certain, recognized the truth of what was happening. This was why he had been watching her. This was why he had known. Whatever she was, whatever Moonborn meant, it was tied to him in ways she did not yet understand, but could feel as surely as she felt the earth beneath her feet. If you want to see how this story ends, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. The gathering continued, but the energy had fundamentally changed. Wolves still ran and hunted and howled, but there was a tension now, an undercurrent of fear and uncertainty that had not been there before. Alara was taken to Thorn's personal tent, a structure far larger and more elaborate than anything she had ever seen. Inside, it was furnished with unexpected luxury. Thick carpets covered the ground. Comfortable furniture created a living space that seemed impossible for something meant to be temporary. And everywhere, the scent of him. That dark spice that made something in her chest tighten with an emotion she could not name. A healer was summoned. an older woman who tended to the claw marks on Alara's side with efficient gentleness. The wounds were not deep, more painful than dangerous, and they would heal quickly now that her wolf had emerged. Shifters healed at rates that would seem miraculous to humans. "You should rest," the healer said, packing away her supplies. "Transformation is always exhausting, but a first transformation, especially one that comes this late, takes a tremendous toll on the body." Alara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her mind felt fractured, unable to process everything that had happened in the span of a few hours. This morning she had been wolfless. Now she was moonborn, whatever that meant, under the protection of the Alpha King himself, and apparently bound for the capital. It was too much. Too fast. Too impossible. She lay down on the low couch, pulling Thorn's cloak tighter around herself. It still carried his warmth, and she found herself burrowing into it like a child, seeking comfort. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the gathering continuing. Howls and laughter and music. Life going on as if the world had not just tilted on its axis. But for Alara, nothing would ever be the same. She had spent 23 years being invisible, being nothing, being the broken thing that did not fit. And now she was something else entirely. Something powerful and feared and ancient. She was not sure which identity frightened her more. Sleep claimed her eventually, pulling her down into darkness where dreams waited. Strange dreams, full of silver light and running through forests that had not existed for centuries and voices speaking in a language she did not know but somehow understood. And through it all, a presence. Watching. Waiting. Claiming. She woke to find Thorn sitting in a chair across from her. His posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. Dawn light filtered through the tent walls, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "How long have you been there?" Alara asked, pulling herself upright and wincing as her side protested the movement. "A few hours," he said, as if this were perfectly normal behavior. "You were restless. I wanted to be here if you woke in distress." It was such an unexpected kindness that Alara felt her throat tighten with emotion she did not know how to express. This man, this king, had stood beside her when she was about to be torn apart, had claimed her as his responsibility, had watched over her sleep to ensure she felt safe. She did not know what to do with any of it. "Why did you protect me?" she asked, the question bursting out before she could stop it. "You do not know me. I am nobody. Less than nobody." Thorn's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been pain or regret, or a complex mixture of both. "You are not nobody, Alara Nightshade. You are moonborn, the last of a bloodline that was meant to stand beside the throne, not beneath it." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his posture making him somehow less intimidating, despite the power that radiated from him like heat. 300 years ago, my ancestor committed genocide because he feared the Moonborn would challenge his authority. He was not entirely wrong. The Moonborn were powerful, perhaps more powerful than the ruling line. But they were also loyal, honorable, and dedicated to protecting the realm. They could have taken the throne at any time. They chose not to. They chose to serve. "Then why did King Aldrich kill them?" Alara asked, trying to understand a history she had never been taught, a heritage she had never known she possessed. "Because he was weak," Thorn said bluntly. "Because he valued his own power more than the good of the kingdom. Because he could not tolerate anyone who might be stronger than him, even if they had no desire to take what was his. And so he slaughtered them all, and convinced the world it was necessary, and the Moonborn became monsters in our stories. Threats to be feared, rather than allies to be honored." He stood, walking to the tent entrance, and staring out at the slowly waking camp. "I have spent years trying to undo the damage my ancestors did. Trying to reunite the fractured packs, to build something stable and just. And all that time, I knew the Moonborn were not truly gone. I could feel it. A certainty I could not explain or prove. I knew that somewhere, somehow, The bloodline had survived. And you think I am that survivor, Alara said softly. I know you are, Thorn replied, turning back to face her. The moment you walked into the clearing last night, I felt it. The pull of the mate bond, ancient and undeniable, and absolutely certain. The world stopped. Alara stared at him, her mind blank with shock, unable to process what he had just said. Mate bond. The most sacred connection two wolves could share. The recognition of souls meant to be together, to complete each other, to rule side by side. It was rare, occurring in perhaps 1 out of every 1,000 wolves, and it was considered absolutely binding. Fate itself made manifest. That is impossible, she whispered. I am nobody. You are the Alpha King. Mate bonds do not cross those kinds of boundaries. They do not care about boundaries, Thorn said, and there was something in his voice now, something raw and honest that made her chest ache. They do not care about status or politics or what makes sense. They simply are. And ours has been waiting for you to find your wolf so it could finally be complete. Alara stood, the cloak falling away, suddenly not caring about her nakedness in the face of this revelation. You are saying we are mates, that the universe decided we belong together. Yes. And you knew this before I even shifted. I suspected. I could not be certain until your wolf emerged and confirmed what I felt. But yes, I knew there was a connection between us. And that is why you protected me. Not because you are noble or just, but because I am your mate, and you have to protect me. There was accusation in her tone, hurt and confusion, and a feeling of betrayal she could not quite articulate, as if he had saved her for selfish reasons, rather than because she deserved saving. Thorn crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that contradicted his size and power. I protected you because you are my mate. Yes, but also because what was happening to you was wrong. Because you deserve protection regardless of any bond between us. Because in a better world, you would have been raised knowing what you are, celebrated for your heritage rather than despised for circumstances beyond your control. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she had not realized were falling. You think I saved you because I had to. I saved you because I wanted to. Because the moment I saw you standing, there, surrounded by wolves ready to tear you apart, something in me broke at the thought of losing you before I even had a chance to know you. The sincerity in his words was overwhelming. Alara wanted to pull away, to run, to reject this entire impossible situation. But she could feel it now, that connection he had named. It hummed between them like a plucked string, resonant and true and undeniable. Her wolf, so newly awakened, recognized his on some fundamental level that transcended thought or choice. This was her mate, her other half, her destiny. And she was absolutely terrified. I do not know how to be moonborn, she said, her voice breaking. I do not know how to be a queen or a mate or anything other than a healer who was barely tolerated by her own village. I cannot do this. You can, Thorn said, his forehead coming to rest against hers, his breath warm against her skin. And you will not do it alone. I will teach you everything you need to know about your heritage, about your power, about what it means to be moonborn. And we will figure out the rest together. Outside the tent, Alara could hear the sounds of the camp breaking down. The gathering was ending. Soon, hundreds of wolves would return to their territories, carrying with them the story of the moonborn who had returned, the girl whose silver wolf had emerged under the full moon with the Alpha King standing beside her. Her life, her safe anonymous existence, was over. There was no going back to her. Cottage and her herbs and her solitary routine. That path had closed the moment her wolf had broken free. Now there was only forward, into a future she could not predict, and a destiny she had never asked for. But perhaps, she thought, as Thorn's arms came around her, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. Perhaps forward was not such a terrible direction after all. Perhaps being moonborn, being the Alpha King's mate, being something powerful and ancient and feared, was not a curse, but an opportunity. An opportunity to become more than she had ever imagined. An opportunity to find belonging not through hiding, but through standing tall and claiming her place in the world. An opportunity to be seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. Alara pulled back slightly, looking up into Thorn's silver eyes, and made her choice. "Take me to the capital," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that still coiled in her gut. "Teach me what I need to know. Help me. Understand what I am." Thorn smiled, and it transformed his face from intimidating to breathtaking. "I will. I promise you, Alara Nightshade, I will give you everything you need to thrive. And in return, I ask only that you give us a chance. Give the mate bond a chance to grow into something real." She nodded, unable to speak around the emotion clogging her throat. A chance. That was all anyone could ask for, really. A chance to be more than what others expected. A chance to discover who she might become given the opportunity and support. A chance to belong. The journey to the capital took 3 days. Alara rode beside Thorn, no longer hidden or forgotten or dismissed. She rode at the Alpha King's side, and every wolf they passed could see it, could understand the message that position conveyed. She was under his protection. She was important. She mattered. The whispers followed them, of course. Speculation about the Moonborn, about the mate bond, about what her return meant for the realm. Alara tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the conversations she had with Thorn during the long hours of travel. He told her about the Moonborn, about their history and abilities. They had been scouts and guardians, their silver wolves able to move through shadows and see in absolute darkness, making them perfect for protecting the realm's borders from threats both natural and supernatural. They had also been healers, their connection to lunar magic allowing them to channel power in ways that could mend wounds and cure diseases. Which explained, Thorn pointed out, why she had always had such an affinity for healing, despite having no apparent wolf. Her moonborn blood had been expressing itself through other channels, finding ways to manifest even when her transformation had been blocked. Blocked by what? Alara asked, fascinated despite her trepidation. Why did my wolf not emerge until now? I do not know, Thorn admitted. But I have theories. The Moonborn who survived King Aldrich's genocide would have been desperate to hide. It is possible they developed some kind of magical suppression, a way to keep their wolves dormant, so they would not be discovered. And that suppression might have been passed down through your bloodline, an inherited safety measure that was never meant to be permanent. So, somewhere in my ancestry, someone loved their children enough to cripple them, Alara said, the bitterness in her voice surprising even herself. Loved them. Enough to ensure they would survive, even if it meant they would never know what they truly were. Yes, Thorn said gently, and it worked. You survived. Your line survived. And now, 3 centuries later, you are free to be what you were always meant to be. The capital city of Shadowmere appeared on the horizon at sunset on the 3rd day, its towers and walls gilded with fading light. It was enormous, far larger than anything Alara had ever seen, sprawling across the landscape like some great beast at rest. Home, Thorn said softly, and there was satisfaction in his voice. Or it will be, once you have had time to settle in. The palace itself was even more impressive than the city. Built from dark stone that seemed to absorb and reflect moonlight simultaneously, it rose from the city's heart like a crown, all elegant towers and graceful architecture. They entered through gates that swung open at their approach, guards snapping to attention, servants rushing forward to take horses and bags and offer assistance. Alara felt overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all, by the number of people moving with purpose through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. Thorn must have sensed her distress, because he took her hand, his fingers warm and solid around hers, anchoring her. I know this is overwhelming, he said, but you will adjust. I will make sure you have everything you need, including time and space to process all of this. He led her through the palace, pointing out important rooms and locations, introducing her to key staff members whose names and faces blurred together in Alara's exhausted mind. Finally, they reached a suite of rooms that Thorn explained would be hers. They were beautiful, decorated in shades of silver and deep blue that reminded her of moonlight on water. There was a bedroom, a sitting room, a private bathing chamber with a tub large enough to swim in, and a small library already stocked with books about moonborn history and magic. "Rest," Thorn said. "Settle in. Tomorrow, we will begin your training. Tonight, you need to sleep and let your body recover from everything it has been through." Alara wanted to protest, wanted to ask the 1,000 questions that burned in her mind, but exhaustion pulled at her, making her limbs heavy and her thoughts sluggish. She nodded, letting Thorn kiss her forehead before he left, the gesture chaste, but carrying an intimacy that made her heart skip. Alone in her beautiful rooms, Alara walked to the window and looked out over the city. Lights were beginning to appear as darkness fell, thousands upon thousands of them, creating constellations that rivaled the stars above. This was her life now. This was her future. And for the first time since her wolf had emerged, she let herself feel something other than fear. She let herself feel hope. The weeks that followed were intense and overwhelming, and occasionally wonderful. Thorn was true to his word, assigning her tutors who taught her about moonborn magic and abilities. She learned to shift at will, the transformation becoming easier each time. She learned to access the lunar magic that flowed through her blood, channeling it for healing and protection, and a dozen other purposes. She learned about pack politics and court etiquette, and the delicate dance of power that governed the kingdom. And through it all, Thorn was there, not hovering or controlling, but present. He joined her for meals when his duties allowed. He walked with her in the palace gardens in the evenings. He listened as she processed her feelings about her heritage, her past, her uncertain future. And slowly, carefully, the mate bond between them grew stronger. Alara felt it like a physical presence, a warmth in her chest that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. It did not demand or control or take away her choice. It simply was, a constant reminder that she was not alone, that there was someone in the world who understood her on a level deeper than words. But the court was not entirely welcoming. There were those who saw her as a threat, who remembered the old fears about moonborn power and resented her closeness to the king. There were whispers in corridors that fell silent when she approached. There were looks, ranging from curious to hostile, that followed her wherever she went. And then there was Lady Serafina. Serafina was everything Alara was not. Beautiful in a classical sense, with golden hair and blue eyes and features that seemed carved from marble. Sophisticated, educated, from one of the oldest noble families in the realm. And she had been, according to the gossip Alara could not help but overhear, the presumptive choice for Thorn's queen before Alara had appeared. Serafina was not overtly cruel. That would have been too obvious, too easily countered. Instead, she was subtle. A comment here about Alara's lack of court training. A suggestion there about how difficult it must be to adjust from village life to palace expectations. Small cuts that bled slowly but steadily, undermining Alara's confidence with surgical precision. It came to a head during a formal dinner, where the entire court was assembled. Alara had been seated at Thorn's side, the position of honor, and she could feel the weight of every eye upon her. She was wearing a gown that had been made for her, silver silk that echoed her wolf's coloring, but she felt exposed rather than elegant. The conversation flowed around. Her politics and gossip and references to events and people she did not know. She tried to participate, tried to show that she belonged, but every word felt clumsy. Every attempt to engage met with polite but distant responses. Then Serafina, seated further down the table, spoke up. "Your Majesty, I have been curious about something. The Moonborn were legendary for their diplomatic skills, their ability to navigate complex political situations with grace and insight. I wonder if Lady Alara has inherited those abilities, or if that particular gift was lost along with the rest of her family's legacy. The question was phrased politely, even respectfully, but the implication was clear. Alara was not fit for the role she had been thrust into, was not capable of being what a queen needed to be. The table fell silent. Every face turned toward Alara, waiting to see how she would respond. She felt her cheeks flush, felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came when she was overwhelmed and uncertain. For a moment, she considered staying silent, letting the moment pass, retreating into the invisibility that had been her defense for so long. But she was not that girl anymore, was not the wolfless healer who could be dismissed and ignored. She was Moonborn. She was the Alpha King's mate, and she would not be made to feel small, not ever again. "You are correct, Lady Seraphina," Alara said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I did not inherit the diplomatic training of my ancestors. I inherited their legacy of service and healing. I spent my life helping people who despised me, who saw me as less than nothing, and I did it not for recognition or reward, but because it was right." She met Seraphina's gaze directly, refusing to look away. "I may not know all the intricacies of court politics or the subtle games you all play with words and implications, but I know what it means to survive despite overwhelming odds. I know what it means to find strength when everyone tells you that you have none. And I know what it means to stand up and claim your worth even when the entire world is telling you to sit down and be silent." The silence that followed was different now. Charged. Electric. Thorn's hand found hers under the table, his fingers squeezing gently in support. "My mate," he said, his voice carrying easily through the quiet, "has more courage and grace than anyone I have ever known. She has survived things that would have broken most people. She has emerged from persecution with her compassion intact and her spirit undefeated. And I consider myself profoundly fortunate that fate saw fit to bind us together." He stood, drawing Alara up with him. "This meal is concluded. Lady Alara and I have other matters to attend to." It was a dismissal, clear and absolute. The court rose as they left, but Alara barely noticed. Her whole body was shaking with the aftermath of confrontation, with the realization that she had just publicly claimed her place and her worth in front of everyone who doubted her. Thorn led her not back to her rooms, but to his own chambers, a private space she had never entered before. It was surprisingly simple, decorated in dark woods and deep greens, with large windows that overlooked the mountains beyond the city. "You were magnificent," he said, turning to face her. "I do not think Seraphina will underestimate you again." "I was terrified," Alara admitted. "I still am. What if I am not good enough? What if I cannot be what you need me to be?" "You already are," Thorn said, crossing to her, and taking both her hands in his. "You already are everything I need, everything the realm needs. You just need to believe it yourself." He hesitated, then continued. "The mate bond has been growing stronger. I can feel it, and I know you can too. And I want you to know that there is no pressure, no expectation that we formalize anything before you are ready. But I also want you to know that I am ready. I have been ready since the moment I saw you. You are my mate, Alara, my partner, my equal. And when you are ready, I want to complete the bond fully. I want to make you my queen, not just in title but in every way that matters." Alara's breath caught. The mate bond could exist in a latent state indefinitely, a connection recognized but not fully activated. But completing it, claiming each other physically and magically, would make it permanent and unbreakable, would bind them together for the rest of their lives. It should have terrified her, should have felt like too much too fast. But instead, looking into Thorn's silver eyes, feeling the warmth of his hands around hers, sensing the absolute certainty of the bond that tied them together, Alara felt only one thing: rightness. "I am ready," she whispered. "I have been ready since you stood beside me when I was about to be torn apart, since you protected me when you had no reason to, since you gave me a chance to discover who I could be, instead of leaving me trapped in who I had been. Thorn's expression transformed, joy and desire, and something deeper than either flooding his features. Are you certain? I need you to be certain, Alara, because once we do this, there is no undoing it. I am certain, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. I am yours, Thorn Blackwood. I think I have been since before we even met. The completion of a mate bond was a private, sacred thing. What happened? Between them that night was theirs alone, but the effects were visible to anyone with eyes to see. The next morning, when they appeared together at court, the bond between them was no longer latent, but fully realized, visible as a subtle shimmer of power that connected them, that marked them as truly mated. The court's reaction was immediate. Some celebrated, seeing the completed bond as a sign of strength and stability. Others, like Seraphina, wore their disappointment like armor, their plans and ambitions shattered by a connection that could not be broken or denied. But Alara no longer cared about their approval or disapproval. She had found her wolf, had found her mate, had found her place in a world that had never wanted her. She was Moonborn. She was the Alpha Queen, and she was done apologizing for being exactly what she was meant to be. The months that followed were not without challenges. There were political factions to navigate, old resentments to address, and the ever-present fear among some wolves that the Moonborn return heralded the chaos and change predicted by ancient prophecies. But Alara faced each challenge with growing confidence, supported by Thorn and by the power of her own heritage. She established a healing academy, using her knowledge and her Moonborn abilities to train others. She opened diplomatic channels with territories that had been isolated for generations. She became not just a queen, but a force for positive change, exactly as her ancestors had been before King Aldrich's fear had destroyed them. And through it all, the mate bond with Thorn grew deeper, richer, more profound. They were partners in every sense of the word, their strengths complementing each other, their weaknesses covered by the other's abilities. They ruled together, loved together, built a future together. On the anniversary of the gathering where Alara's wolf had first emerged, they stood together on the palace balcony overlooking the city. The moon was full, enormous and bright, and Alara could feel its pull in her blood, that connection to lunar magic that defined her Moonborn heritage. Do you ever regret it? Thorn asked quietly. Coming here? Leaving your old life behind? Alara considered the question seriously, thought about the cottage and the herbs and the simple existence she had known, thought about the loneliness and the rejection, and the constant feeling of being less than whole. Then she thought about everything she had now. The power thrumming through her veins, the mate bond connecting her to Thorn, the knowledge of who and what she truly was. No, she said finally. I do not regret any of it. That girl who could not shift, who was despised and rejected, she needed to exist so I could become this. So I could understand what it means to be on the outside. So I could rule with compassion instead of just power. She turned to face him, rising on her toes to kiss him gently. You stood beside me when no one else would. You gave me a chance to discover my strength. You loved me before I even knew how to love myself. How could I regret any path that led me to you? Thorn's arms came around her, pulling her close, and they stood together under the moon, two halves of a whole, exactly as fate had always intended. The wolf that had once growled at an entire village in fear and defiance now stood tall and proud, no longer alone, no longer rejected, no longer searching for a place to belong. Because she had found it, in the palace, in her power, in the arms of her mate. She had found home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who loves epic romance. Tell me in the comments, did you see this ending coming?